The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the O.R. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, C.O.R.E. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National C.O.R.E. and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings once again. How's everybody doing out there? I see we got that ancient African mindset, the first one to tune in, Sister Robin, one of the most dedicated viewers on this show. Brother Ogawa, the brother's hardest working man on the internet, making this show move. Sister Gloria Briscoe, Yvette Anderson, glad to see you back, and Sankofa Face Yoga Rashamilo Kumbo. Greetings to all of you and others who will tune in to this show. So I hope everybody's doing fine, doing okay. I want you to encourage people as the show goes on to hit the like button, and encourage people to subscribe that haven't subscribed. If you see a new viewer, just as I think I have one right here, subscribe. So the last 3 shows, not in order, 2 of them were in order, then we had another one before that, and then we went back to it. We've had 3 shows on stateless African societies, and they dealt with different dimensions of these societies. The first one on democracy, the second one on the way in which twinlinealism worked, which was a concept that I formulated in my book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. Dr. Obinga says the term twinlineal should be in the dictionary, and it defines basically just society models, starting with the family. And then the third one was on how stateless societies, those are societies without kings and queens, developed deep thought philosophy, showing how all of them had been influenced by the Chwa or Kun or San people as the foundation. So that's been the three, though not all sequential, but mostly sequential. If you haven't seen all of those, you should check them out because we've overlooked these societies because we tend to think that big is great and small isn't. And some of these societies were large, but most of them were smaller and they were the most just. I see Ogawa is talking about how I'm dressed today. We're going to be in Oakland honoring a Oba from Nigeria, and I'll be giving the opening address. So I'm dressed for this show, but I'm also dressed for that, which will occur later in the day. Um, so last week on Sunday, you had the privilege of seeing a conversation that I had with a beautiful South African leader um, named Mkulu Nzingzia, who is a leader of the Mandela Foundation in South Africa and has a number of other projects, and he's quite popular in South Africa. I didn't ask his age, but he looks like late 50s, early 60s, and he's a leader in terms of introducing Kemetic thought into South Africa, and I think there's much more. So we had a hour-long conversation, and there was a power blackout um, in the city where he was at, Johannesburg. So that ended that, but it was a good discussion, um, focusing on many topics with important emphasis on Maat. So we've drawn some viewers from South Africa, and in the shows on the classless, um, stateless societies, we drew a lot of viewers from West Africa, especially Nigeria. And we've had some um, traditional people who are in royal houses, um, discussing some things about their culture. Today, I'll be um, welcoming a Yoruba Oba in a city in Nigeria. And he's a brother that I met in 1990 when I went to Nigeria um, representing Pan African Peoples Organization, and especially a group called Wajumbe, People with a Message, led by a sister, S.N.C.C, who was a good friend of mine who passed away just a few years ago. And went there and then went to Ghana and negotiated a cultural exchange agreement with the government of Ghana. So the brother that we're having today um, will probably be working on some cultural exchange between Africans in the U.S. and Africans on the continent, in this case in Nigeria. And I hope to be doing some work in South Africa. This brother is really beautiful, Brother Mkulu. Um, I've arranged for a second interview, and it'll show shortly on our channel. We haven't done the interview yet, but we will. And this is a brother who's very conscious, beautiful spirit. So I know we're going to work some things out because I'm not just doing this show to do a show. I have other things that I'm into, you know. Topmost is Pan-Africanism, unity of African people. And so this show is reaching out to Africans all over the world and anyone else that's interested. So that you'll get to see soon. Um, Now, today's topic is a logical extension of last week's show on African philosophy, showing how it developed out of stateless African societies with a focus on Kemet, um, with a focus on the Bambara, um, and other African groups, the Dogon in particular. And that was showing you that these societies um, delve deeply into different dimensions of African culture. And in the case of the Dogon and the Kemites, astrophysics. In the case of the Bambara, who are also a Malian people, a very similar kind of seva or system of knowledge and transmitting it based on a mastery system. And I hope you got something from the discussion on the Bambara, because this is a discussion on what is recent in terms of the living traditions of Africa. Whereas when we're talking about the ancient civilizations, we're talking about largely what we learn through the writings or the monuments or various other things that we find. But we're not always getting the direct knowledge that you can still get coming out of many of these African societies today. And there's a cultural unity with all of them. And so one helps to explain the other. I want to welcome Sister Lisa Wolf Manlu, Chad Jomo Kenyatta. Greetings. So this is an extension of the discussion on the relationship between stateless societies and the formulation of what the Dogon called deep knowledge, or what is generally called philosophy, the deep thought, in this case of Africa. So today's presentation is going to take a look at how the philosophy of Maat, arising out of Kemet, or at least highly developed in Kemet, how that philosophy inspired the sculpting of the noblest group of human beings in the world, and that's many African cultures that embrace this view of Maat, second only to the San people or the Kun. And this is the distinction that I want to make, that I'll show their connection to Maat as a concept later, though I've discussed it in previous shows. But the key point is today is going to focus on the development in African civilization, with an emphasis especially on Kemet and the Bambara, of a special order of human being, ideal order of human being, male and female, and developed in Kemet, the Bambara, but throughout Africa. And you're going to see some of the reasons that these civilizations were so noble. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, these noble human beings. But I need to stress the distinction between that and the Chwa, Kung, or San people, the Kung and San being the same people, who are the first people on the planet, Chwa. Among them, they were all noble human beings. They were all the noblest of human beings. That's the distinction. And it's no small distinction, because, as I pointed out in previous shows, they describe themselves as pure people. And these are not people with big egos. They're not only not big in size, but not bloated up in terms of their conception of themselves. So it's something when you have a civilization of noble people. And remember, noble in the context of no kings or queens. Noble in the context and concept of your character is your nobility. which, by the way, is how a lot of enslaved Africans were described in the US and in the Western Hemisphere as a people who carried themselves with regality and nobility. And that's the quality of the people who lead the plantation and begin to lay the infrastructure in the United States and throughout the Caribbean, um, South America, Europe, Asia, wherever they are. They're noble people, whether they have kings or queens or not. And so this is the distinction. So be very clear that if, as we've demonstrated time and time again, the Chwa give birth to the most just human beings and the most just and creative societies on the planet, then it's no wonder that they would set a standard that societies that would follow, coming out of the stateless societies, coming out of later kingly and queenly societies, that they would aspire to this. But they're no longer in the golden age of unicity, where human beings are living in balance with nature on the most fundamental level, where they govern themselves, where they have the best conception, the most just conception of the just society, where all the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society. And when they create just about everything that serves as the foundation for civilization, including ancient Kemet. So while we're going to focus on the special type of human being that evolves later, and there are a lot of others that aspire, and they were noble too, but not on this level, understand where this comes from. And this is the most treasured thing that human beings have. Nobility of character, that's the greatness of a person. So the topic for today is Geru and Ma, the Kemetic way of the self-mastered person. So those of you that saw the flyer, you got it, but Geru, Geru, and then Ma, M-A-A, and then again, Ma, the Kemetic way of the self-mastered person. Now, I titled it that way so that, the title could be brief, because Ma is describing the self-mastered person in the Bambara context that I've mentioned before, and we'll go into more depth later on. So this is the focus here. Why this focus? Well, what's the point of talking about African civilizations, large or small, hunter-gatherer or agrarian, if we can't draw from them models, methods, and a path for human excellence, for shaping and molding, or as the Bambara would say, sculpting master human beings. I mean, what's the point of this? And as we are undergoing an awakening, and as our people are trying to get themselves together globally, as well as in this country, those models are very important. And I know that that's been the goal of most African, African American, African Caribbean, African diasporan mothers and fathers, that they develop children who are the best human beings possible. And many have. So that's the reason for focusing on this, just as we focus on the stateless societies to show how various institutions generated, such as real democracy, showing their grounding in the twinlineal system of male-female equal empowerment, something not understood before. So here we're going into what was a conception, first of all, of the just human being, and what was that human being made up of? So this is extremely important. And if you're saying you had great civilizations, then it's the quality, as John Henry Clark said, of the civil behavior of its people. Civilized people are civil. Breaking it down, nice. Huh? You all saw that scene in New York where a brother went off on a subway, one of these trains, and in New York, and was taking his coat off and screaming and saying that he was hungry, he was thirsty. He said he was tired of living. And then somebody grabbed him and choked him to death with another person holding his arm. How can you call this a civilization when instead of feeding the hungry, you're going to kill them or treat them as criminals, as this society does, while the criminals run free, the ones who are running the world? And right now, on the media, they're going through the investiture of the new king of England, you know, with all the pomp and circumstance based on blood and based on the old empire that the British had that they said the sun would never set on. Now it's cloudy and raining in Britain a lot. And the people are in trouble, you know. Strikes and demonstrations demanding higher wages, and the conservative government sticking it to the people. Just as in this country, the Republicans want to cut social programs uh, in the name of cutting back on too much spending. Well, it's interesting that they're not interested in cutting back on the main part of the budget, which are not these small social programs. They've ended welfare, so people can only get it for 5 years, and they do very little else. So why isn't anybody talking about cutting the defense budget when there's no enemy in sight threatening this country? So we're living in a mean, vicious world where the principles that I'll be talking about and the development of the ideal human being isn't even on the agenda. You know, that's something that's the last thing they're concerned about. Yeah, he was referring to the young man performing as Michael Jackson. Yeah, and looked like it's pretty good too. He gets his life snuffed out for that, you know. So today the topic again is Jeremiah and Ma, the Kemetic way of the self-mastered person. Now, in doing this presentation, I want to honor some people that have contributed to knowledge in this area. One is Dr. Theophilo Benga for his groundbreaking work, all of his works. He's written over 17 books, speaks 10 languages, is finishing his 18th on the Pharaoh that he's been working on as long as I've been working on, or maybe longer, my book on Seba. And this book is a book on African philosophy, Theophilo Benga, African philosophy, the Pharaonic period, 2780 to 330 BC. And if you haven't read this, you should read it. This is probably up to now, of all his masterworks, the masterwork. And it covers a whole lot. So I'll be drawing from some things from Benga and doing a critique too. But I want to acknowledge him as the foremost master on dynastic Kemet in the world today, and for this work especially, but all the other works he's done as well. I also want to acknowledge the work, and there's a lot of work that he's done, and particularly one, the work of Dr. Maulana Karinga, and particularly his work on Maat. Trying to look at where did I put this book here, which is entitled Maat. Oh, here it is. the moral ideal of ancient Kemet. Maat, the moral ideal of ancient Kemet. And this is the most thorough exposition on Maat written. Um, and so I want to acknowledge his contribution, and I'll be drawn from a few things from his book. And then I want to acknowledge my master, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, for his work, Medu Neter, Divine Speech, a historiographical reflection of African deep thought from the time of the pharaohs to the present. This is his work, but he has many others, as these other authors do. And Jake was a master of mine. This is a picture of him here. A very kind, humble, no-nonsense brother, hard-line brother, who, when I'd asked for critiques, starting with my book on Malcolm, he said, "Do you really want it?" I said, "Yeah." And then when he gave me the most stinging critique on the mother principle in draft form, which helped me tighten a few points up, one point in particular, his comment afterwards was, because it was on the phone, I had to call him to get his critique. He said, in his deep voice, little guy, but he got a deep voice, he said, "You asked for it, didn't you?" Yeah. So I want to honor these three because some of the things that I'll draw from will be based on some of their research as well as my own. Now, this presentation is based on my own ideas on the subject covered today, but each of these scholars have provided some important background, as well as others that I don't have time to go into today, who have also specialized in some of these areas. But I refer to them because theirs are the deepest reflections on these areas. And of course, Jake was my master, so I have a special place for him in my heart. And then Avinga and Jake, they were both friends. And then I know Maulana and Karinga. So I don't want to sit up here and act like I just came up with all of this on my own. Huh? No. And I would also say that these three scholars have the distinction of all reading Medu Neter, and that has enriched their understanding of Kemetic thought. And Maulana Karinga was initiated into Medu Neter by Dr. Jacob Carruthers. And then I sure went off on his own and studied. Yeah, Wolf Manlewis said he's rereading Intellectual Warfare. That's an excellent book, and it's a critique of the scholars who oppose the African-centered intellectual thrust of the 80s and 90s and 2000, and particularly the Harvard School, Skip Gates and others. It's a deep piece, so it's worth reading. Anything that Dr. Carruthers has written, and he was an author who was brief. Everything he did was brief. He was not into long stuff. In fact, he told me that when he wrote his master's thesis, it was so short that the reviewer refused to read it. And this is Jake. This is always Jake. Because I remember John Henry Clark saying, well, Jake should write more on the Haitian Revolution. He wrote one of the two classics on the Haitian Revolution, The Irritated Genie. And when I told Jake that, he said, typical of Jake, no. And he apprenticed under John Henry Clark. So Jake had that gift of brevity, you know. He could say a lot in very few words. So this presentation is going to reflect my own ideas on the subject, but I will be drawing from some of the ideas that some of these scholars have put forward, as well as my own. So I'm going to start this in a novel way. You'd expect me to start by defining Maat, you know, And most people here could think they can define it, you know, most of you. And then a lot of our people, this is new stuff. But I would say that the average Black person in this country, without knowing the name or the word Maat, have preached it to their children. You know, they just didn't know its source in terms of the name of the philosophy because it's deep into our culture. So the first thing I want to do is get into in discussing the definition of Ma'at and the meaning of Geru, the qualities of the ideal person who's described as Geru. Before getting into that, I want to get into the origin of Ma'at. What is its source? What is its root? This is also a question not only for Kemet, but for African civilization at large. So you can't just answer this question by just looking at Kemet. But what's its source? This is a very important question because the correct answer will enable us to distinguish the foundation principle of African civilization and distinguish it from the foundation principles of Aryan or Euro-American so-called civilization. So this is extremely important. Extremely important. What's its root? What's its origin? Now, this question is very important because there are some assumptions about the origin of this term Ma'at. What is it grounded in? What is it founded on? So Dr. Theophilo Benga, in his book on African philosophy, the Pharaonic period, 2780 to 330 BC, makes this comment. And he is referring to Ma'at and in referring to it in its moral dimension, but in its totality. He says, Dr. Obenga, in referring to Ma'at, said, quote, Egyptian morality, which is the core essence of Ma'at, he didn't say that, I'm saying that. Egyptian morality is of civil and secular origin. To be specific, he said, it is civil and secular in its origin. Civil and secular, meaning that it is not connected to religion or spirit, right? This is his conclusion. I'm quoting from him. Now, there's another African philosopher. His name is Kwame Gyeke. He's from Ghana, and you spell his name Gyeke. He's a great philosopher, and he focuses on Ghanaian or Akan philosophy. And he's written a book on Akan philosophy and on other subjects, particularly with the focus on Akan culture, ethics, and whatnot. He also argues that the ethics of the Akan derive from social interaction. It has nothing to do with religion. Okay. Now, he also says that in ancient and traditional Africa, he said this, there was not a single atheist. So I want you to get that one straight. Huh? Not a single atheist. Now, philosophers are very careful in ever saying that all or everything, because there's always exceptions to the rule. So if you're saying everybody was, you got to really have something solid to stand on. And he did, because you can't find an ancient African civilization that was secular. I mean, by secular, you mean political, stripped of spirit or religion. So this is their position, and it's position of a number of other scholars, not all, but many. And here I'm citing two who are African scholars. Now, while it's true that social interaction plays a role, that is, people interacting with each other plays a role in shaping morality, no question about it, you know. But is it the source of it? Is it the primary basis for it? You know, social interaction in the Aryan or European world didn't lead to this high aspiration for morality, though some would argue it did. And those that do, particularly in the Greek case, will argue that that came through Kemetic influence. I'll deal with that at the end. So I don't doubt that it played a role, you know, but it certainly wasn't based on a secular interaction. It was not based on a secular interaction. So I disagree with both Dr. Obenga, who I highly respect, and Dr. Gieke, who I also highly respect. This guy's one of the best continental philosophers dealing with traditional Africa alive today. And so his work is magnificent. He's written a number of things. You should check him out. So what's my basis for disagreement? The key point is I'm not doing this because I want to disagree. I'm doing this because I want to ground the discussion of Maat and Geru within its context, its roots. Where does it come from? What's its source? So here's my overall point. From the ancient dynasties or period of Kemet, which precedes the dynasties, 10,000 BC, and then on up to the period of S.O.R.E that gives birth to the first dynasty, technically. He was a real person. Through the beginning of the 18th dynasty, there was no separation between the political and the spiritual. And by the way, politics is a Greek word. It's referring to polis or city-states. And the Greeks were never able to turn these into unified nations. But we're using that term to describe governance systems and how societies were run. So from the ancient period, 10,000 BC, up to the 18th dynasty, there was no separation between sacred and secular. In fact, everything was sacred. In Kemetic society, and that includes in ancient and traditional African societies, and it starts with the Twa. You know, they are the authors of this. So, what do I mean by that? And see, this is where a lot of historians have distorted the history of Kemet, but of Africa in general, because of their training, their despiritualized intellectual training that leads them to want to deny a spirit, as the people in the Caribbean would say, groundation to African civilization, grounding, you know. And in some cases, it's not even intentional on their part, it's their training. And so that's all they can see, you know. And this other stuff that I'll describe in a minute is regarded as spookish and something that they're afraid of. So here's my point. From the ancient period of Kemetic civilization, 10,000 BC, to the beginning of the 18th dynasty, and largely this is true of the 18th dynasty on, but there are some changes beginning in the 18th dynasty. Up to that point, the philosophy, language, geography, cosmogony, science, word system or philology, government, literature, drama, um, were all spirit based. They were all grounded in spirit. Now, what Dr. Obenga says is that Maat doesn't have a religious origin. And if that's as far as he went, he'd be correct, because the Kemet wasn't based on religion. It was based on a spirit system. To have a religion, you don't only need a god, it's almost always male, but you need a book, you need prophets, you need laws. That's generally what characterizes religion. And in the case of the Hindu case, where the Hindus in their great book, the Gita, are espousing on deep spirit subjects like the soul and other things, reincarnation and other things, it is still cast within a religious context, but it is drawing on some deep spirit stuff. And that's because when the Aryan conquered India, and I've gone over this before, they took over the Dalits, who are the black people who gave birth to the civilization of India, also called untouchables today, a term they don't want and don't like, and they're correct in saying so. So they have brought in what they got from the African-based spirit system, a religion. They've encompassed it in a religious framework, and you know it because they say things like, you must believe every word of this book. You must obey it and follow it. And in fact, they've combined a spirit system with a Aryan Lord and Master system. And so it's a mixture of the two. And I'm saying that because I know a lot of people who are spiritual, both African and people of other ethnicities, draw on it, and they have a lot of good stuff in there. But it's mixed. It's a religio spirit system, but it is essentially a religion, revealing some spirit things, but it is making commands and giving orders. So when Obenga says that the philosophy of Maat didn't have a religious base, this is technically true, in that you don't have a God issuing orders telling you that you must obey Maat, or else there's consequences or anything like that. And what you see as expressions of Maatan ethics are in, like, the so-called negative confessions, or coming forth, the confessions of coming forth by day, where you're denying that you did anything wrong. I didn't commit adultery. I, didn't commit murder. I didn't commit theft. I didn't instill fear in the hearts of another. I didn't cause another to weep, which are really states of mind, which indicate a very high state of moral ethics and high behavior required of human beings in ancient Kemet. So in that sense, he's right. And if he had left it to that, that would be fine. But when he says it's based on a purely secular origin, well, that can't be. Because if we look at the language of Kemet, Meru Necher, what is it? It's the speech of God, God's speech. And Meru Nefer is an attempt to approximate God's speech. So this is coming directly from a spirit source, God, not a religious source, a spirit source. And so it requires injunctions in speech. You have to have a high level of speech, God's speech. You're not going to be able to speak God's speech, but it's the speech of God that comes to man and woman. And so Medu Nefer is the attempt to approximate it. The Bambara have the same concept. I've discussed this before. They say what comes from God is divine, in this case, speech. And when it hits the human being or anything that involves matter, it becomes sacred. That means it's not as pure as its source. So speech in Kemet was spirit-based. And Abinga would agree with this. I pointed this out before, but some of you haven't heard this. Those of you who are new, the rest of you have. Spirit was so central to Kemetic civilization that even geography, especially geography, was discovered through doing what the Kemites called mapping the geography of heaven. Geography was spirit-based. The cosmogony, the origin of things, the watery mass, the noon, what is that? That's electromagnetic energy, because it's not really water. It's watery light. It's energy that some would call spirit. You understand? So science is rooted in that, both astrophysics, astrology, and physics, as well as mathematics. So all of it has a spirit base. I made the point that in ancient Kemet, numbers weren't only used to measure quantities, but they were entities. They had a power within themselves. Government, Pharaoh. Who's Pharaoh? The representative of Maat on earth. You know, again, and why? Because without this representative who is pursuing, and not all pharaohs did, truth and justice, then there's going to be disorder on earth. So the notion of pharaohship is spirit-based. And, of course, ethically based, among other things. Drama. We had a discussion on this in terms of the dramatic nature of the text of ancient Kemet, involving high drama. And in fact, teaching and everything else was dramatic because it was taught through symbols that moved and grooved, And in fact, in Medu Neter and Medu Nefer, they both imitate speech. And speech is what? Vibratory forces. The forces that come from the vibration of the spoken word. And so written things imitated speech to bring down the vibratory power. Oh. So if you look at literature, what was the literature about? It was about communicating with the gods. It was to give you access to the heavenly realm. The paintings on the walls inside the tombs and the pyramids all had spirit power to them. There's no concept of art in traditional and African systems. And this goes back to the C.O.R.E, whose writings are spirit writings. And if you read my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, I show how even in hunting, the hunting activity involved drawing down spirits. And I gave an example, and this was recent. This was in the last century of a C.O.R.E hunter and a C.O.R.E woman. They have to catch an antelope. People are hungry. And so this white guy who had joined them, their hunting band party, these were coon people, snuck up and watched what they did. And they drew a drawing on the ground, much the way that it's done in voodoo when they're going to bring a spirit down. And it was the drawing of an antelope with an arrow in its neck. And so then he snuck up and watched them the next morning when the sun rose and the C.O.R.E woman sang a song. And then the Twa hunter, the man, shot an arrow. That afternoon, he came back with an antelope with an arrow in its neck. He shot that antelope without being able to see him. He drew him into the orbit of the spirit of the drawing. Of course, this is mumbo jumbo for some people, and that's why our scholars don't want to touch this stuff. But I'm into Ifa, the Yoruba system. And Ifa, and this is true throughout Africa, they're all divination systems. And my master is a Babalawo Ifeyemi, and a Raba, the second highest priest in the Ifa divination system. And he's a master diviner, meaning he tells you things about things that are going to happen, and they happen, or about things that could happen. He could stop them from happening. I'm alive because of him. You hear me? But some people will say, oh, this is spooknology. But most of us are afraid of this. And some of us are dead because we're afraid of it. I've told people this, the new people haven't heard it. When I moved into the house that this study is in right now, 1993, I was broke. Put all my money into this house. And I get a call from my Babalawo, Ifeyemi, early in the morning. He never calls me, and never early in the morning. And he said, some people have heard this, others haven't. He said, I had a dream. And I said, what was it? He said, I saw you in a coffin. Now, first of all, I'm broke. And, you pay for these things, especially if he's going to stop this from happening. You pay for this, and I'm glad to. I'm just broke. So so first of all, I joked. I said, how did I look? Because everybody dies. But I knew he wasn't calling me because I was 100 years old and he saw me in a coffin. No, you look just like you look right now. I said, Can you stop it? Yes. And so we negotiated a price, because a good Babalawo is going to charge what you can afford. And I'm not into bargaining on my destiny. I was just broke. That's all. And I didn't think about an installment plan. I would have done that. I just always into cash. I don't do credit, So we have a opening of this house in 1993. And Ifeyemi comes. He comes from Nigeria. He's here. We would have him teach in my classes and stuff. And then I went and stayed in his village, Shogbo, and whatnot. And then he wrote in the welcoming book that I have, he said, you'll live a long life. You're okay. Now you might say, yeah, how did you know you were going to die? Well, I'm supposed to be foolish enough to wait and then say, oh, I wish I had done something. But I can give you confirmation, but it won't prove anything to people who aren't spirit-based. Some people, and I've told this to other people, but this is for people that haven't heard it. Some people in Ghana wanted to initiate me into chieftaincy or kingship, which I have no interest in. And so they went to the diviner, and the diviner said, you shouldn't. He's going to be dead pretty soon. This was around the time that Ifeyemi had called, before he did his magic. He intervened with the spirits and stopped that. There was nothing wrong with me health-wise. Some people can die and you can do an autopsy and it's just dead. He just died. You know what I mean? Huh? So I'm just simply saying this, that spirit is at the groundation of Kemetic civilization and of all ancient and traditional African civilizations. And it is still the guiding light for most Black people, most African people. Now, some have frowned on this or claim not to believe in this, but when they're in trouble, they end up going for help. But then some don't, and they end up in trouble, So I'm saying that Maat can't be based on a secular origin, that is a non-spirit based. It definitely has no religious origin. It is not a command that came in a book, even though some people will say there are books of Maat. These are writings that have been treated as books, just as in Ifa. They have oral pronouncements on which they call books, over 250 of them that a Babalawo is supposed to remember in reading a person's future. Though very few know all of these books, but these are not books in the Western sense. They're oral and they're committed to memory. But in the case of Kemet, they are writings that serve a spirit purpose. So there is no God issuing an order that you must do this or do that. But Maat is spirit, and it is an idea, and it is a bunch of other things that we'll get into in a minute. But I want to quote Abenga on this one, because he also says, I'm quoting him on page 224 of African Philosophy, the Pharaonic period. He says this: Ma'at, quote, is the energy that animates both the visible and invisible world. Okay. So how can this be a purely secular thing, stripped of any religious, which I agree with, but any spirit component? How can that be when, in fact, it is an energy that animates both the visible and invisible world, which I think is correct. I've noted before, and see, I think you do best when you compare these notions with the notions of other African civilizations, and particularly those that are around right now. It is that the Bambara, who have the conception of Ma, M-A-A-A, M-A-A, and I was a person who Facebooks me, who sends me material, sent me something earlier this week on the Tutsis. And the Tutsis, who these tall Africans, they have a dance that they call Ma'a. And it is a dance that's supposed to harmonize things, bring harmony to things. This concept of Ma and Ma'at is deeply rooted in African civilization. But again, how is a dance going to harmonize something? Because there's some force in it, vibratory force in it. There's some energy in it, that can draw down spirit power. Of course, again, I can understand people saying, oh, yeah, prove it. So the Bambara, as I pointed out before, describe God, and I think they have one of the strong definitions of God as infinite force outside of space and outside of time. The Chwa definition is God is infinite force, a part of which he distributes to everything that God creates. And God is never described as he or she, because it's a force, it's a power. And as I've said, as I've seen and experienced God, God is a great white light. And it's interesting when people pass on to the other side in Kemetic literature, they pass to the realm of the light. It's also interesting that a lot of people here have experienced this. My sister experienced it when my father passed. He went through the light and she saw this radiant light come into the room. Now that's for a good spirit. The ones who are going to another place, I'm sorry, that ain't what happens. You know what I mean? So the point is that central to the foundation of Ma'at is that it is an infinite force, it is an energy, and it is many things that manifest out of that. And it's key to understand that when we're talking about spirit, spirit is above all else intelligence and many other things. So when we're talking about Mangala, or Ma, in the Bambara conception of things, this is the conception of the human being that grows out of their handling of infinite forces within themselves. It's a question of how you handle them. The Ma person, the Bambara highly evolved person, or the Ma and Gala person, the highly evolved person in Kemetic society, is the one who best manages these forces that are in all that God creates, but especially the forces within human beings. They best manage their own internal forces. And the Bambara have something else to say. They say that when in creating Ma, and God's name is Ma and Gala, so Ma means, since you have part of God's name, part of God is within you. The Bambara said God created man and woman for the special purpose of having communion with him and her. For what purpose? For the purpose of serving as guardians for the cosmos, guardians for Mother Nature. And the Bambara say it is a delicate task to be Ma. And these people who have thrown the earth out of balance because of their alien philosophy of lord and mastership over nature, the Francis Bacons and others, they have come to find out, so they say, that this is a delicate cosmos at the point of global warming, the melting of ice caps, the extreme weather conditions that are being caused throughout Mother Earth. While these same corporations are doing everything they can to stop anything being done to stop the burning of fossil fuels and other things that cause the warming of the planet, everything, and are planning to get into Alaska so that they can exploit the oil and other wealth that's underneath the ice. And they have a saying when they serve on a board of directors that, remember, we won't be here then, meaning they can do all the destruction they want. They don't care. They'll have big buyouts, big bank accounts. Well, they not only throw the planet out of balance, they throw humanity out of balance, leading a brother on a subway to say, I don't want to live. Got nothing to eat or nothing to drink. Instead of somebody giving them something to eat, giving them something to buy something to eat and drink, and maybe help find him a job or whatever help he needed, they're going to shut him up because he was black and he was making noise. You know, that's the kind of society we're living in. Not for everybody, but for those who are running it. So what is Maat? Now, Maat is a very complex concept in the overall sense, though it's basic in its fundamental sense. Dr. Obenga, I give him credit for this. He defined Maat in 4 domains, which is telling you Maat is comprehensive. One is the cosmic. The other is the political. The other is the social. The other is the personal. Now, the cosmic domain is a domain where in Medu Neter they say Ma'at is the rudder of heaven. That's the directional part of a ship, meaning it is direction. Ma'at is direction. And it's the direction of the cosmos. And obviously, it has to be invisible. It has to be an energy. And it directs the entire cosmos. Think about that. And according to Medu Neter, it is internal to God. Ma'at is internal to God. It is the force that governs the political domain. And so, as I already said, the Pharaoh is supposed to uphold Maat. Didn't always, but when he did, that's supposed to bring some harmony to society. And in the classless, stateless societies, the lineage system, the lineage head is the one who maintains communication with the ancestral forces. For what reason? To maintain harmony within the family, within the village. And how? Through that lineage head being a good human being. The thing about Africa is that leaders in general, particularly in inner Africa, to lead something were required to be, when they were males, the best man. Not best man as riches, the richest one, but the one who never lied, the one who never turned his back on a war party, the one that never cursed, the one that never disrespected women or children or anybody else. That one was a one picked to be lineage head. That one was a one picked to be a Santahine in the Ghanaian system. Now, this is actually superior to the Kemetic system because in the Kemetic system, Pharaoh got his office through birth. And you hoped that he had worth. And if he did, it would come through teachings, it would come through the way in which he was raised, and it would come through what he brought into this earth, because you bring in certain qualities. So in the inner African system, they didn't trust someone to assume office because they are descended from a king. They trusted him based on his qualities. Best man. This thing that they've been showing on the coronation of the king in England, the person who ruled was often a demonic man. He was the one who could crack heads and do all kinds of horrible things, even inside his own family, and then get all the jewels and gold and everything else that they got through conquering other people, and then hide behind all of this radiance and act like this is something good. As they say, behind all great fortunes are usually great crimes. And we already know the great crimes of Britain, of the United States, of the Aryan, and of others, So the dimension of the political domain is one of the dimensions that is governed by Maat. And that includes the justice system. This is Obenga's point, as well as the social domain. And the social domain governs especially family and social institutions. And the foundation of those, as Obenga would say, of Kemet was male-female equality. Well, it was in the twin lineal model that we haven't known before. Male-female equal empowerment. And that's the way lineages worked, and that's the way villages worked, something that I've been showing on these classless, age grade, chiefless, or kingless and queenless societies. So Maat, that is the twin lineal model, is the essence of Maat. It's the expression of Maat. And when societies are grounded in that, you don't have to worry about singular leaders taking you off somewhere. Because a lineage head, even when just appointed, elected as lineage head among the Ghanaians, he might go the wrong way on something. He's the first among equals. He's governed by the consensus of the lineage, not his decision alone. And that's the same thing with the Asantehene, the king, So there are checks, male-female checks. And in the case of the Asantehene, it's the Asantewa, Queen Mother, who is not required to go through a test that she's the best woman. Who's going to test your mother? Now, when Queen Mother, does not mean she's the mother of the king. She is not. That would be a severe conflict of interest. something that the Supreme Court doesn't care about. If you've been watching Clarence Thomas and his shenanigans and others, they're all bought, you know. So this is these are some of the domains of Ma'at, which the most important for humans is the personal domain. And so the human being was surrounded with this notion of speak truth, do truth. And so Geru, the Geru person, is that person who was the embodiment of this. Everyone in the society knows that this was a central value. And I think it's safe to say that the ethos or the unique quality of the Kemetic people was Ma'at, just as arbitrary power is the ethos of the Aryan. Those who have power do whatever they want to, you know. Each people have their own ethos, just as creativity is the ethos of the African and American in America, based on what we had to do to stay whole as a people and recreate a culture here. So that is the fundamental value that we have here, creativity. And it's been key to us producing any kind of change. And of course, it's also grounded in Ma'at, justice and truth, because that's where wisdom comes from. That's where creativity comes from. So Ma'at is therefore drawing from a totality of forces that then give rise to this truth and justice and other things. In its beginning, Ma'at was conceived as straightness. And among the Kun or the San people, C.O.R.E, that I've covered before, Maasori, is the source of Ma'at. I've ran this past Obenga. He agrees. He said yes. He doesn't contradict this because this is older. And the Twa, they practice this. All of them, or virtually all of them. Whereas it was a goal to aspire to in subsequent societies, including ancient Kemet. So Maasori meant straightness, uprightness, and truth. And it was natural that it would be practiced. Now, Ma'at is ethical. And as an energy, it also sustains life. It gives energy to people because, in fact, when you're aligned with the truth, when you live the truth, there's an inner harmony with you that is healthy, that promotes, along with other practices, a long life. Doesn't mean that just because you speak the truth, you'll live long. But if you're truthful in other ways, if you're balanced in the way you approach your life in terms of treating people right and treating yourself right, including exercise, how you eat, your thought pattern, many other things, this will certainly contribute to health. And it will certainly take you out of the realm, or at least help to take you out of the realm of stress. So Ma'at is also an abstract principle of truth and justice. And it's a direction, it's an order that the cosmos takes, that Earth takes. In African philosophy, order is the greatest good, disorder is the greatest wrong. And in the Maatian ethics, Isfet, or wrongdoing, is the disordering principle. So Ma'at is the basis for order. Now, Ma'at serves as the guide for the Geru person, or the ideal human being in Kemet, Geru, or the Ma person, the exceptional or ideal person in Bambara culture and throughout African civilization. whether they use this term or not, they had this same idea of the self-mastered person, who was also described as the silent self-mastered person. Now, we'll see what this actually means. And the best way to do this is through maxims and proverbs. And we know that in African culture, especially African culture and Caribbean culture, they're strong on proverbs. African Americans, but not as strong. And proverbs in African culture and Caribbean culture give us a multidimensional picture. It's like a symbolic text, and those symbols are key to gaining meaning. And so in Medu Neter, they have a text that explains at least one dimension of Geru. And it is revealed in a maxim, these are sayings of Kajimni. And these are maxims that didn't come from him, but a wise person that shared them with him. And so this gives you an idea of what Geru means. When you are seated in a company, avoid the food you love. All it takes is a brief moment of self-mastery. Greed is baseness, rightly decried or opposed. A glass of water quenches thirst. A mouthful of greens comforts the heart. There is a substitute for everything good, and a little can take the place of plenty. Despicable is he who serves his belly after meals. He forgets those in whose house his belly roams. Now, this is a text on self-mastery. You hear me? And it's symbolic. And you best understand it when you're dealing with its multidimensional features. And so what does it mean that when you are seated in company, avoid the food you love? It means in the company of others, check your appetites. The stuff that you might want to eat in private, avoid it in public. And in private and public, don't eat it to an excess. And so this takes self-discipline. What it's saying is to avoid eating what you really love takes self-discipline. And this is the essence of the self-mastered person. And they're saying that it only takes a moment. It only takes a moment to stuff yourself, and it only takes a moment to practice moderation. And so, the key point about this is in a moment you can express self-mastery, but the basis for self-mastery is self-discipline. And that is the discipline to follow, in this case, the basic truths of Maat, the most important of which is truth and justice. Those are the most important because it's harmony, it's truth, it's balance, it's right order, it's many other things. But this is the essence of it. And it operates on many levels. It is multidimensional. It is complex and it is simple. But to master it takes discipline. That means work on ourselves, self-discipline. When you saw the show that we did, the two-part series on the African Children's Advanced Learning Center, our school that's been running for over 50 years, the teachers, Ustadi Kadiri and Robert Woods, stress that the way they got the students to achieve excellence in their academics and encouraging excellence in their character was through a system of self-discipline that was intrinsic to their academic teachings. And they were always being taught to master themselves, the cardinal virtues. This is central to their teachings. And this, along with a system that brought them to insight, which is knowledge, that's the African method, whereas in the European method, it's information that you repeat, then it's empowering because you've discovered truths yourself, mathematical truths, scientific truth, moral truths, other truths. These are things you'll never forget, and you will never forget the moment you discovered them. So that was a part of instilling self-discipline. And again, that's a spirit civilization. It's nobody over you forcing you to do it. That's what good parents do. They instill those values in you so that you can live on them yourself. And then it goes on to say, greed is baseness, rightly decried. Now, it's important here that they stress greed as a central thing that you must master, because eating the food you love, meaning not having control over your appetites in the presence of others, and then exercising it in moderation when you're alone. All of these are teachings against greed. And of all the vices, the worst vice is greed. Because when a person is consumed by greed, they're capable of doing anything wrong. And I would also say greed is a force. It's a life force. It's a negative life force. And if you get possessed with it, which is what the rulers of this country are consumed with, they want more and more. They're taking more and more from everybody and reducing them to levels of poverty and misery that human beings should not be reduced to, on the planet to even worse levels. Then that leads to every other crime. Greed leads to murder. Greed leads to lying. Greed leads to wrongdoing. So if you are going to experience self-mastery, then this is a key thing that you must master. And then it says, a glass of water quenches thirst, meaning you don't have to have wine. But if you do, you don't have to have too much. And I always tell people that drink, alcohol is no good for you. It destroys brain cells. You know, now it's going through your throat into your system, but it means that the chemicals and everything else are going up into your brain. You hear me? And so the wine industry tells you a couple of drinks of wine a day is okay. Well, 3 will make most people drunk. Huh? You know? So I'm not saying you just drink water, but I'm saying of all the things you drink, that is the most satisfying to your system. But the point is, you don't need a lot. A little will suffice. And in this particular case, a lot of water will really suffice and make you feel good the way you should. And then he says, a mouthful of greens comforts the heart. You don't have to gorge yourself on a whole lot of food. But greens will comfort the heart, and greens are healthy. You hear me? And by the way, all blacks in enslavement, a lot of them knew these teachings. And while they had short life expectancies, average of 50 years in this country, you had those living 126 years of age. Why? Because, first of all, in slavery, you ain't going to excesses in eating. But more important, you brought in health practices from Africa, cleansing yourself. A lot of black people have their cleansing systems that they use every morning, and castor oil and other things. So you don't need a lot. And a mouthful of greens, that means something that's healthy. It's not a lot, and it's good for you. And you don't need a lot. so you're restrained in your eating. There is a substitute for everything good, and a little can take the place of plenty. So the substitute for everything good isn't good. And if you go to excesses, that is going to cause you a problem. That's one of the worst things you do when you eat and stuff yourself. While you're eating, oh, it's just great. But when it's over, oh, you're just stuffed like a pig. You know what I mean? But this is a metaphor for saying that taking too much of anything is wrong. And that is the basis for greed. And a little is plenty, or it takes the place of plenty. You don't need a lot. By the way, studies on longevity show that the key to longevity is eating less. That's the key. And it's a specific amount of calories, you know. And then it goes on to say, despicable is he, and this could be she. Don't think it's just pointing this to one. Despicable is he who serves his belly after meals. You know, after the dinner's over, they're still feeding themselves. First of all, a second portion, a third portion, and then in the middle of the night, stuffing themselves and stuff like that. It's not good for the health. It produces weight. But more important, it's not good for the spiritual health because it's involved in excesses. This is the key point. So again, let me repeat that one. Despicable is he who serves his belly after meals. He forgets those in whose house his belly roams. You know, in other words, first of all, he may be eating up food that others could eat. But, you know, he just gone to extremes. That ain't good for him. And I know people will say, I love food. Yeah, good. Especially good food, healthy food. But to excess. But this is a metaphor for self-mastery. This isn't just about food. This is about mastering the lower elements in our life. Now, because we have come under the experience of slavery, colonialism, and in Africa now, neo-colonialism, and in the Caribbean, South America, which means economic or indirect colonialism, then we have other issues to deal with. To be a self-mastered person, there are some things we have to deal with that Africans didn't have to deal with in ancient and traditional Africa, like knowing ourselves as African people and loving it, knowing our gifts, our Ka, our C.O.R.E, the gifts we come into this planet on, and pursuing them no matter what anybody else thinks. Being able to control resentment and anger. We have good reason for having anger. But the fact is, if we don't gain self-mastery, the anger will consume us, you know, and other issues that we have. The issues of not seeing ourselves through our own eyes, you know, seeing the beauty inside of ourselves and taking on someone else's estimation of us. Instead, we have to see ourselves through our own eyes. That's why we're going to do this thing on the sixfold stages to mental freedom. So self-mastery requires that you know your strengths and your weaknesses, and you work on the weaknesses. Accentuate, you can always draw on the strengths. That's easy. But what is hard, and that's the real task of living as a human being and becoming a Jeremiah, self-mastered person, is to be able to master our weaknesses. That is the key challenge, whatever they are. Excesses in whatever areas they are. So this is one metaphor for self-mastery. So there is another part of self-mastery, and that is the silent one. And so what does that mean? You know? So here in this same maxim, they have this statement: let your name precede you, your mouth remaining silent. When called, do not boast of your power. Do not boast of your power. Among your age mates, take care to antagonize no one. No one knows what the future holds or what punishment God has in store. So, silence here has a number of meanings. One meaning is controlling anger, resentment, and things like that, and the lower passions that can get you into trouble: greed, resentment, and so forth, envy, and so forth. But here, when they're saying remain silent, they're referring to specific things. I honored my best friend, we did, the community in Fresno, Candy Solowazi, a couple of Saturdays ago on his birthday in Fresno. My wife and I took the train down, and they asked me to give the main presentation. He's my best friend. And I started off by saying, I'm honoring Candy Solowazi, who's a special person. And then I went through all of this. I've known this brother for 50 years. You know, he's my best friend because he's the best man that I know and the best human that I know. I have a number of good friends, but he's my best friend. And it took me time to, both of us to form this relationship. We've done a lot of things together, and we know each other inside out, as you do with best friends. And so one of the qualities of Kendi is silence. He's a talker. So in the community, you would say, no, he's not silent. But he said to me just recently, there are certain things I'm silent on. Me, I, all of those things. He never talks about himself. It took me 50 years to find out that this brother graduated from the University of Chicago. I already knew he was smart, but you had to be a straight A student to do that, and came out not brainwashed because he was an artist. So he went through the School of Art, but he took his main course at the University of Chicago, full scholarship, because it was to pay his tuition, not everything else, So it took 50 years to find that. You want to talk about some silence? No, that's some silence. Those are bragging rights, even though some of us shouldn't be bragging about that, because so many of us come out brainwashed in these so-called Harvards and Yales and University of Chicago's. But some, like Raymond Winbush, who's been on my show before, came out with his mind intact because, as he said, Bobby Wright was his classmate, who's a psychologist who formulated the idea of the psychopathic racist personality. A little guy, brilliant guy. Saw him just before he passed away, and had a chance to see him before, So he was his connection that kept him grounded. And Raymond Winbush is one of our real good scholars, a reparations man, and many other things. So Kendi was silent on those things that most people are going to brag about. He didn't. You hear me? And this is the real key thing. So this is suggesting that silence for the self-mastered person means controlling your ego, not thinking too much of yourself. And then they end this with, no one knows what the future holds or what punishment God has in store. Just because you're riding high now, don't be sure that you're going to stay on that high road, meaning your life is going good, everything is positive. Yeah, it can turn in a minute. Be humble. You hear me? Be humble. And as the teachings in Medu Neter teach, wisdom is found even among the market women, meaning don't close your ears to truth. Be open. That's what Coltrane said. He listened to the worst players because there was something that they could do he couldn't do. That was the humility inside of him. And that's also why he was able to access the droning sound that came to him in a dream after he had cold turkey, drugs and alcohol. And that, he said, was a sound from heaven, you know. So when the Bambara say that God created man and woman so God could communicate with him and her, then the best communication comes when God is able to share something with you that you really need. That is only going to come when you've worked on purifying yourself. And you may not reach this stage of Jeremiah. I'm working on it. I haven't. I know I haven't. But, you know, you're working on it. And you've done enough internal cleansing that you can hear what God has to say, or God is willing to share something with you. But that only happens when you spent your life working on something. God ain't going to be sharing something with you if you're just running around saying, oh, God, tell me the truth of everything. Or one of the secrets of nature, you're going to have to be studying nature, some aspect of nature, physics, quantum physics, biology, botany, whatever, you know what I mean? Or whatever it is, music, or whatever your calling is. So this is the conception of Jeremiah. In the Kemetic system, the system for self-cultivation was a system that pretty much matched what the ancient Kemites believed would be your final days, when you go to the hall of the two truths and you have to be assessed for how you lived, and your soul is measured against an ostrich feather. And it is at this point that you are judged according to the various things you've done in your life. Now, parapsychology shows there is such a thing. That is this field of the higher mind, life after death, people who have gifts in this realm. They show that when you pass to the light, if you go into that realm, that there's a life review that occurs, and it's instantaneous because you're in the realm outside of space and time. Things occur in milliseconds. It would take a long time on Earth. And you get to see everything you did on this earth, how you affected other people. You get to feel and see the harm you did and the good that you did. And then that is the weighing and the balancing coming from your ka, you know, that does the weighing. And so you go to a heavenly realm, depending on your level of development. There are many levels of heaven, or you go to a realm that people don't want to go to. Huh? So this is the final thing. I've mentioned this once before, but I'll go into it a little bit more detail. So most of us, when it comes to working on ourselves, part of what we do is meditation, and that's fine. That's good. I'm not knocking it. And meditation has been shown to, you know, be good for your health. But the African way, in this particular case, the Kemetic way, was a way that pretty well duplicated what's required for self-mastery. And it duplicated the process that's going to happen when you reach that final stage. But it is something you do every day. And as Dr. Obenga has observed, Kemetic spirit systems are very practical. My observation is they're abstract and practical. So when they talk about the heart mind, which is, we've covered in this show before, which is both the seat of reason and emotion, it's pictured as the heart because the Kemites were masters of medicine, so they knew what the heart looked like. But the heart is also symbolized as the seat of emotion, of reason, of the higher mind. and it is where God sits inside a person. So this is a practical thing. They're giving you a very practical symbol of the heart, but they're attaching it to the mind. And recent studies show, as I pointed out on the show before, higher brain frequencies come from the heart than from the brain, you know. And I should note that this notion of self-mastery differs from the European notion before getting into the African method. The European notion, particularly that of Plato, is a notion where reason is on the top and intuition, the spirit feeling, is pushed to the side. And so the higher qualities of the spirit mind is reduced to a lower level. The people of Greece had no word in their language for right or ought. Right or ought. You ought to do something or right. No word for right. You don't see Plato referring to Maat. He refers to the mind and the philosopher. And in the Republic, it's a philosopher king that rules, the guardians who come underneath, and then the masses of people. And everything is based on hierarchy. Hierarchy rules, not values of truth and justice. And his reason is despiritualized. There's no spirit in it. And that reason is the basis for a Francis Bacon, who becomes the father of empirical science, who then, while he changes some of Plato's thinking, he's not into arguing and speculating the way Plato and Socrates did. He is into empirical science, but he's not a scientist. And particularly observing nature. For what purpose? For domination and control. And so the idea of mastery, self-mastery of Geru, Ma, and Ma should not be confused with the European notion of domination. The domination of those who can think over those that they think can't think. Huh? And then later, the domination of those with power over those who are weak. Plato rejected this idea of the will to power, of city-states fighting each other. He didn't like it. But that was the ethos of the average Greek. But the point is, he adopted the idea of reason dominating over emotions. And this is also a rejection of the feminine, of the nurturing, of the higher mind. It is like the slave mind, the logical mind, being put in charge of the higher mind, the spirit mind. I've gone through this in previous shows. So when we deal with Jeremiah or self-mastery or Ma or mastery, understand from the maxims you can see they are not talking about suppressing feelings. They are not talking about subordinating the feminine to the masculine. You know, they're not talking about will to power. They are talking about trying to be a manifestation of truth, trying to live a life of harmony and balance. And so the method used in ancient Kemet to keep a person in this state of working on themselves, of trying to master themselves, was a simple daily review. And the daily review was at the end of the day in a quiet place, they would go, and you can go and look at what happened in the course of your day. What did you do? What did you say? How did it affect others? You know, did you say something that was inappropriate? Did you do something that was inappropriate? If so, why? Was something, were you bragging today about yourself? Was it something that was excessive? You know? And so the whole point of this daily review is so that the next day you can go about correction. Try and control that. We all have weaknesses. Some of us have weaknesses of the mouth. The mouth goes south. We're born with it. It may be impossible to stop the mouth from going south, but you can check it. You can control it. And here's the key point in Maat. The key point in self-mastery. Think before you speak. Think before you speak. The greatest errors we make is when we talk without giving thought to what's going to come out of our mouth. And then when we do that, some of us will regret it. Some of us, like Sammy Davis Jr., will say after he hugged Nixon, and which indicated that he liked him, indicated that he would do it again. You know what I mean? He didn't learn nothing. You hear me? Huh. And that's when black people put a boycott on his butt. You know? Hug Nixon? Are you crazy, man? But he did it without thinking. But he's saying he'd do it again. That means this is somebody who's acting without thought. Now, that is really bad. You know? My rule as a public speaker is when I'm asked to give an impromptu speech on the spur of the moment, that's a dangerous speech. So I know I have to decide 2 or 3 things I'm going to say and then sit down. Most of you think I can't do that because of the length of these. Notice these are getting shorter. We've got an hour and 46 minutes and we're almost finished. So I do that because you don't know what's going to come out of your mouth if you have not regulated it. And this is a key thing. So this is Ma'at in practice. This does not mean that you're not spontaneous. It does not mean you can't create on the spur of the moment. People who are able to do that, they have developed great self-mastery in whatever it is they do. And so when you're able to do that, then you find that whereas African-American improvisation is based on spontaneous organization, and that's based on discipline, which is the key to freedom. The key point is discipline is freedom. When you're disciplined, you're free. You get me? Since we're an oppressed people, we're supposed to be fighting the opponents that have got their foot on our neck, proverbial, because they got a lot more than their foot on our neck. But you have to do it creatively. You have to do it effectively. You have to do it so you can win. Remember, I'm an original revolutionary. Remember, all this stuff is being brought down to use to produce change. You ain't get no jazz musician up there playing a saxophone and squeaking because they didn't practice. Huh? Just because they may have the natural gift to play the saxophone? Yeah, but you got to practice. You know? Sister Alicia Keys, you know? She's a master composer, pianist, singer. And she got a white mother and a black father. And she ain't got no problem with loving herself. She loves Africa. She's gone to Kemetic 2 times. One time, she took one of the best tour guides you could take to Kemetic, along with her family and stuff like that. But what's the key to this sister? Discipline, baby. But she's got talent. But the talent has come through hard work. Now, some of us work harder than others because, as Dizzy said, God gave some of us more gifts than others. Now, Charlie Parker, he could get his stuff together fairly quick. Unfortunately, he didn't have the discipline to get off drugs. And I know he tried, you know, so that's unfortunate. But the fact is that he was gifted. He could soar, you know, with that alto saxophone, which is the basic saxophone, and do things with it no other alto saxophonist has ever been able to do, and help, along with Dizzy and Monk, to come up with the greatest innovation in music in the 20th century, bebop. You hear me? bringing back the polyrhythms of African rhythms. And so, in terms of him drawing from himself, he was able to innovate, not just improvise new music with a team of innovators. He had discipline, musical discipline. He didn't need as much because he was given more. Some of us have to work harder than others, but work you will have to do. And work on self-mastery is the key. You don't lose your spontaneity. You don't lose your creativity. You can just take it higher and higher. So every aspect of Kemetic literature, you'll see reference to self-mastery. It is a part of the ethos of Maat. So we're all at various gradations of self-mastery. We all have stuff to work on, including my friend K. Indy. He knows what that is, you know. None of us got to this point where we got it all together. But when you master yourself, you master everything else. And our goal is not to dominate nature, but to just tweak it the way George Washington Carver did. Help heal it. Help make it mo better. Hotep. Oh, Wolf Manley said, I don't talk as long as Professor Jeffries. Yeah. Wolf Manley, yet both minds are Ma'at because Ma'at is duality and balance. Ma'at is also unicity. So there's a balancing thing, but it is also the oneness that you're drawing from as well. Chad Jomo Kenyatta. I'm still thinking about seeing an attorney about a grievance filed at UPS. I just relocated, and ironically, I work for UPS again. Good. I'll consult people and see if there's anything I can give you as advice on that. You haven't heard from me because, I need to get advice. I don't know what to do in that situation. I know some people that work or have worked for UPS, so I'll see if I can get some advice from them. Brother Ugawa asked, whose parents told them, think before you speak? Yeah, I bet you a whole lot. And before you act. Yeah. Okay. Is there any comments here? Any questions or something that I can respond to? Wolf Manlu, the West is falling, and so forth. Yeah, their paradigm has collapsed. This control paradigm, nature domination paradigm, nature and everything is rebelling against that. But it means that we have to put forward alternatives for just societies. Right now, on this micro level, which is Ma'at on the personal level that Dr. Obenga talked about, and then by using it on the micro level, applying it to the macro level. And Ogawa, don't close your ears to the truth. Yeah, I would say that the key thing about life is following the truth. And you got to be open to it because you never know where it's going to take you. You never know the dimensions of it that you're going to be exposed to. And that's where your growth is. And that also is the basis for serving something higher than yourself, whatever it is, your calling, your purpose. It is always about bettering the condition of humanity and your own people. And when you do that, that's where your growth comes from. That's your reward, not money, Kurt Thomas, alcohol is the weapon of the conqueror. I think he meant conqueror. Yeah, you're darn right. And understandable. I'm not knocking alcoholics. I know why Black people drink. I know why Native Americans drink. I know why a lot of people drink. They ain't happy with their lives. Native Americans because they know they're conquered people, you know, so they escape in the bottle and they know it's going to lead to death. It's almost a willing of suicide, you know. But that's the depression caused by living on reservations where there's often no running water, no toilets, bad food. These Native Americans were free people. They were people who had great diets and stuff, you know, lived long lives. And now you get this reservation mess that they call food. And then the mess that's racism that they face every day. Black men and black women. We often escape to the bottle and are in denial of why we're escaping. We're not really honest with the reasons. And one of them is anger over what the system has done to them. Dreams deferred, you know. August Wilson, watch his plays. That's what he's dealing with, you know. The fact that you can have generations of black people who prior to the 60s, very few could really fulfill their dreams because of the limitations imposed by this system of apartheid. I don't call it white supremacy because they're in decline now. So, yeah, alcoholism is an escape, and the first thing that alcoholics always do is deny it. They're not alcoholics, you know. So you got to face that. But white-itis is an escape. You know what I mean? Trying to be someone other than yourself. That's escape. You won't be happy with that. Brother here, Brother Kumbo, he says, I never saw Proverbs in that light. I have a book of Proverbs. Mama used to say, by Kumba and Cleveland sold on Lulu. My mother raised her children on Proverbs and parables. Yeah, that's good. Because that also gets you to think. Because those, you got to translate those. What do they mean? And those are symbols. They have multiple meanings. Chad Jomo Kenyatta, we're resilient people with epigenetics, according to Dr. Joy DeGruy. I made her book, PTSS, into an audiobook for my daughter. Yeah. Well, you have self mastery, you can overcome that stuff. Yeah. Working on yourself. He mentioned the king was named through lineage, but in Inner Africa, another system was used. I didn't say it was named through lineage. What I said was that the same qualities that a lineage had were the same qualities required of a king. And they had to be best man, meaning they had to have the highest moral qualities. Whereas among the Aryans, they were often the worst man, but the one that could will power and do horrible things. So that was one way. That's in societies with kings and queens. But in societies with lineages, generally, that's the model. The model is the lineage head is among the eldest, but it's the one with the best qualities of being a human being. Yeah, when I mentioned the system superior to Kemet, the system of selection of your national leaders is much better than a system where your national leader is going to be picked based on uh, genetics, based on the fact that they are the child of the leader. That child may be no good. That child may suffer from mental illness. Um, that child may have all kinds of problems that manifest into real problems as they grow older. So